Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. I thought I would sit down and do another video for you guys and gals, but let me get a sip of my water first. Get my beautiful radio voice going, and let's talk about this. You know, every time we bring this up, people get upset. They're like, how dare you? Haven't you heard of a ketogenic diet? When you say things like, the overwhelming bulk of the evidence shows that most of the leanest people on earth, the most athletic people on earth, the longest lived people on earth tend to eat higher carb, lower fat diets. Okay, this is not a great mystery. We know why. We have plenty of data on it. And when I say if anyone's going to eat fat, your fats should be healthy fats. They should be polyunsaturated fats, hopefully not refined ones. So again, people who start talking about frying foods in seed oil, I agree you shouldn't be frying your foods in anything, whether it's oil or butter. Absolutely, I agree with this point. No disagreement. But saturated fat's bad for you. The evidence is overwhelming. High-fat diets in general are bad for you. Right? And they also cause you to gain fat more quickly. Studies show this. We have all the data from the metabolic ward. It's the only thing you eat that stores as fat to any appreciable degree. Every drop of fat under your skin, every last single gram of it came from fat that you ate. 100% of that. There's a little bit from other stuff around your organs. All of it under your skin. So when people want to make that argument, therein lay the problem with it. And the same thing when they bring up the other, except that I know people who follow strict ketogenic diets, the high-fat ones, who are still morbidly obese. They're still fat, they're still sloppy, they still have diabetes, they still have heart disease after years of being on them. Why? Because they're eating really high-fat, high-calorie diets. It's no great mystery. But it's so strange that people want to argue this. The evidence is there. The anecdotal evidence is there. Look at most bodybuilders who've gotten really lean over the years. They're usually, at least in the off season, or oftentimes they're eating higher carbs, they're eating lower fat. That has historically been the case. The ones who do the opposite is oftentimes they're extreme outliers in those groups, or they choose to cut that way for a contest for whatever reason. But plenty of people also get contest sugar, particularly for natural shows, on really high carb diets. They get peeled. They get absolutely shredded and shrink wrap looking. So again, this is nonsense in the real world. Almost every athlete, elite athlete on the face of the earth eats a high carbohydrate diet. They have to. So whenever people bring up, well, you have to think about athletes and low carb, except that they don't do well on low carbs. The athletes, when they do studies, it's like, well, we find some of them do well on higher fat for endurance athletes. Yeah, because they need to have taken 5,000 calories. And some of them struggle to get it through carbohydrates, even liquid carbohydrates. So yes, there can be benefits to adding additional fat for extreme endurance athletes. But they're still eating high carbohydrate diets. The ones who try to do low carb still do not function. So there's your athletic side, there's your bodybuilder side. But then when we go to the general population, you start looking at the cultures. Who lives longest? Who has the lowest disease? High carb, low fat. And we say that we're not saying they're eating table sugar, because if you have access to table sugar, you probably have access to tons of dietary fat. When those things happen together, we have issues. And again, I would agree when people bring that up. The people on the other side say, you're saying we should eat sugar? No, you shouldn't be eating refined sugar. You shouldn't be eating high fat, and you shouldn't be eating large amounts of refined sugar. Now, ideally, you might want to consume zero of the latter, but if you had to choose, a little bit of that in moderation is still probably better than adding a bunch of fat to your diet. I don't think it's a good idea to add much of it. I think it should be reserved for cheat days, special occasions, not something you do regularly. Right? People bring that up too. Every time that food pyramid comes up, they're like, oh, that food pyramid was terrible. Like, really, it matches still what most of the current data says. The only downside is that, like, we might want a little bit more fruits and vegetables in it. That's the only thing that's changed. They're like, maybe a little less starches, some more fruits and vegetables. Because most people are still getting, but they're not following the food pyramid. Keep that in mind. that gets pointed out, then people bring up, oh, sugar, but sugar was supposed to be moderated. You know, when you look at that pyramid, the very tip was all the refined sugars were up there, and that last little bit, the stuff that should be moderated the most, should be eating the least of, included added oils and fats. That would include butter, right? And even fatty meats and things, and dairy were the next tier down. But that very tip, the stuff that you're supposed to be eating the least of, which could also mean, the least could mean zero, added fats, refined sugars. Okay, come on. And people, again, the silliness and the audacity of people to say, oh, that caused these problems. Really, people didn't follow it. Because last time I looked, drinking soda and eating pizza and cheeseburgers and ice cream and hot dogs and ding-dongs and cakes and pies, none of that is supposed to be eaten on the food pyramid other than the last little tiny moderated amount as rare occasional things. Same thing, people say, well, how's your fried food? That should be on the very tip. It's supposed to added fats. That would include frying and oil. It's supposed to be the very tip of the pyramid. That whole tip should comprise 10% or less of your entire diet should come from stuff in that category. So all that stuff. The problem is that Americans flipped it over and did the opposite. They're eating 50% of their diet from the stuff in the tip that they weren't supposed to eat. So just because the food is on the food pyramid doesn't mean the food pyramid caused the problems. If people followed it, we wouldn't have these problems. All right. And the data over the world confirms this. And we need to be clear, anytime you do find fats in the diets of people who are in the longest lived cultures, what are they? They're almost always really healthy fats. It's usually nuts and seeds, it's fatty fish, or it's something like extra virgin olive oil. It's never cheese and butter. It's never big old fatty cuts of sausage and hamburger meat, okay? Or bacon. It's never on there in large amounts. But what's always there is vegetables and starchy carbohydrates, whether it's rice or sweet potatoes, over and over and over. Again, the real world evidence is overwhelming. The scientific literature is overwhelming. So anyone who tries to argue with this, I'm sorry, you don't have a leg to stand on. You're following fringe experts who are cherry picking data, fringe scientists who have been debunked and who are oftentimes unlicensed and lose their ability to even practice medicine or nutrition or whatever because of the crazy stuff that they're promoting. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.